Cube Stereo Hybrid 140 may not represent the pinnacle of performance in the e-bike space right now, but this model is fitted with Bosch's ABS system. That's right, this has anti-lock brakes just like your car, and it's proved to be a super interesting bike to test. So stay tuned to find out how the Bosch ABS system and the Cube Stereo Hybrid 140 have been performing in this long-term review on loamwolf.com. Let's go. Yes, this is a Cube Stereo Hybrid 140, and it's Cube's kind of mid-travel e-bike designed for long pedally trail missions through to light enduro kind of riding. Definitely not kind of a super pointed bike. It's designed for really covering a wide spectrum of terrain and riding styles. We're just going to briefly cover the key details on the Cube for this video. If you do want to learn a little bit more about it, then head to the article in the description below where we'll really explain all the details and the different spec options and stuff. But yeah, for now, this is a 140mm rear travel, as you may have guessed by the name, paired with a 150mm fork, 29-inch wheeled e-bike. If you go for the size small in the range, it comes with a pair of 27.5-inch wheels to better fit smaller riders, but the medium through to extra large sizes are all equipped with dual 29er. It comes in a range of build options from the $5,500 entry-level build, which is 3,500 British pounds, all the way up to over £9,000, really highly spec'd build. And then in the EU only at the moment anyway, you can get this ABS-equipped version for just over £4,500. Certainly the build spec on this is not super flashy. There's not really any, premium coatings, super high-end level components. And it does come in a weight of just over 25 kilos all in. So it's certainly not a, super performance driven bike. It is designed to be slightly more on the budget price point. But of course then you do also get the ABS tech, which we'll talk about in a little bit. In terms of the geometry, there's not really any standout figures, but you'll kind of get the gist of the bike based on its 66-degree head tube angle and fairly long 457mm rear end. Otherwise, it's all fairly reasonable middle-of-the-road geometry, and yeah, just targeted at covering decent miles on mellow to relatively rowdy terrain. Although the rest of the build kit is not necessarily anything to shout about, this does have a pretty nice C62 carbon fibre front end. They're one of their higher grades of carbon to shave a little bit of weight from the front triangle, which is mated with an aluminium rear triangle to keep the overall cost and complexity down. I guess what you'll be wondering most about though is the Bosch ABS system. This is Bosch's anti-lock braking system developed for bikes, e-bikes in particular, across the spectrum from your town and city bikes all the way up to enduro mountain bikes. Bosch worked with a few different brake manufacturers to bring this system to life, one of them being Magura, like we've got fitted here, and this is a specific brake set designed for the ABS system. The ABS works by fitting a couple of sensors to the front and rear wheels, speed sensors that obviously measure the speed of the wheel, and then when they detect the wheel go into 0 miles an hour, as if you've locked up, while you're moving at least, it'll use the little brake pressure kind of limiting device or adjusting device that's built into the front brake only to basically modulate your brake for you and prevent your front wheel from locking up. It's also designed to kind of calculate when the rear wheel is going to lift off the ground as well, and it'll also stop that from happening if you've got it set up in such a way. Bosch offers 3 different modes of it, which is either ABS off, ABS all road, which is designed for your kind of more typical use, or ABS trail, like you'd typically be riding on a mountain bike, which gives you that little bit more control and sort of aggression for stopping quickly on mountain bike trails. It's certainly an interesting system, and it doesn't need any extra batteries or anything. It instead uses the e-bike battery itself to power it, and I don't believe it uses much energy at all, because certainly it doesn't feel to impact the overall range of this 750 watt-hour battery in the Bosch system that we've got here. Certainly interesting, but I think the proof is really in the riding. So let's talk about how the Cube Stereo Hybrid 140 equipped with the Bosch ABS system has been performing out on the trails. When I was first approached by Bosch to test the ABS system, I was initially expecting a full-on enduro e-mountain bike, so then when I learned that it was going to be the stereo hybrid 140 rather than their more aggressive 160 or 155 models that I was testing, I wasn't necessarily super excited by it, but this thing has actually turned out to surprise me quite a bit. Not a huge amount of that has been sort of provided by the ABS system, which we'll talk about next. But yeah, certainly it's actually packed quite a lot of capability, a generally quite enjoyable ride, especially considering it's not necessarily super high level spec and the fairly sort of mellow geometry and intentions of it. And it's, yeah, certainly provided a fairly good time out on the trails around me in Scotland. Talking about the Bosch ABS system first, definitely the key talking point about this bike, certainly in the way that I've got it spec'd here. It's been an interesting sort of system to get used to, or just to find the limits or maybe the drawbacks of, just as I've been riding the bike, you know, not really thinking about it necessarily, just trying to get on, enjoy the bike and yeah, sort of see what naturally occurred to me with its performance. Setting up the ABS system is no different to basically setting up a regular e-bike with a regular brake system. You don't necessarily need to do any setup to it, you just set it up like a regular brake and all the sort of magic is contained within that ABS module on the fork leg. So you can hop on the bike and if you had it turned off, it'd perform like a normal brake system, albeit the Magura levers on this bike anyway have an incredibly long minimum reach, so the absolute closest you can have them to the bar is still way further out than I would normally run a brake, which definitely was very interesting to get used to at the start and wasn't ideal necessarily, but I learned to get on with it and it didn't necessarily cause any problems in the longer term. But once you set it up to the trail mode, the Bosch ABS Trail setting on the system, you can basically just drop in and ride it like a normal mountain bike. There's not anything you need to do differently for the ABS system to work. But that's sort of where I get to my major issue with the system. In order for it to be doing anything for a experienced mountain biker like myself and like the majority of people that I'd imagine will be watching this, I'd imagine by now, after riding even just one set of powerful brakes for a few rides, you've probably got pretty used to modulating that brake with your finger naturally. And while you may not be absolutely perfect at doing that, I'd wager that there's not a huge number of instances where you're locking up that front wheel. So to me, anyway, I spend a lot of time riding mountain bikes. I've got my brake control pretty damn dialed. I didn't find that it was actually actively helping me all that often. Let's try the all-road setting of ABS. See how that compares. Oh, straight away, I don't feel like I can brake quite as hard on the front wheel. It's a bit scary. Whoa! Okay, yeah, this is gonna have to turn off pretty quickly because that's not letting me slow down. That's scary. Back onto trail, hopefully a bit better. Whew. Yeah. I did find on a couple of occasions where I wanted maximum stopping power in like an emergency stop situation, it did start to limit my maximum braking power, and I feel like that is in a very kind of narrow set of circumstances where it was super loose, super steep, and I was braking as hard as I absolutely dared. And yeah, I could feel it. It didn't necessarily stop me quite as quickly as I was expecting to stop. I think there is a point where locking up a front wheel could theoretically stop you quicker than if you kept it rolling, at least when you're, you know, maximum front wheel loading, maybe even letting that back wheel come off the ground in certain scenarios where your back wheel braking isn't going to be doing anything anyway. But there was a couple of times, it wasn't necessarily the times where without the system I'd be stopping comfortably and easily. It was more emergency situations where I did feel it step in slightly to my detriment, at least in terms of my confidence and my feeling of what was going on. But what it does absolutely do if you're going in a straight line and you're careful, you can pull on that front brake with as many fingers as you like and you will not get that front wheel to lock up or for the back wheel to lift off the ground if you're in a neutral setting. It does still let you endo turn and pick up the back wheel if you sort of naturally try and, actively try and do it, which is quite clever, and I'm quite surprised that Bosch has managed to figure out the overall, I guess, algorithm to let you do that. It's certainly impressive, and there was only a couple of times where I'd deliberately go into an endo and it'd let that front wheel slip, and then I'd end up, dropping both wheels. And that's over a long testing period where I've been doing a lot of endos and having a lot of fun. So yeah, certainly I think Bosch has done a really good job with it. It's just, for me as an experienced mountain biker, I don't necessarily think it's something that you need. But somebody who is not experienced at mountain biking would be able to hop on this bike and brake as hard as they want and not suffer any issues, which I think is quite impressive and definitely useful as, maybe a company is hiring bikes to people who are less experienced, or for a less experienced rider just wanting to hop onto a bike and go without any sort of adjustment period to it. They'll just be able to eliminate one of those things that they have to learn. So definitely an interesting system. It doesn't really take much away because you can theoretically, or you can actually turn it off if you want and just ride it with normal set of brakes, albeit with those long reach levers. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's not for me, and I wouldn't recommend it to typical experienced mountain bikers necessarily yet. I don't think it's quite a performance product yet, but it's super interesting. I think it's pretty damn well executed, and yeah, I'm pretty excited to see how that tech progresses. Talking about the rest of the bike, the Cube Stereo Hybrid 140, and it is a bike that affectionately got the name Grandad at the start of the testing, and that wasn't by me, that was by a friend, but I sort of agreed with those notions until I started riding it, and then I realised that although it may not necessarily make things as easy as possible to go super fast and charge hard, it does actually do a pretty damn good job. I've ridden this in some fairly challenging enduro terrain and it's not really batted an eyelid. It's safe to say that for a 140mm bike with fairly conservative angles, this Cube Stereo Hybrid 140 is definitely up for a bit of a rally. You definitely can't push it quite as hard as a full-on enduro e-bike, and even in the all-mountain space, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to being pushed as absolutely as hard as you can. But given that it's got a 66-degree head angle, given it's only a 140mm rear end with quite a linear suspension kinematic, it does a pretty good job, and I was left kind of scratching my head a little bit about exactly how it is being able to do that. I think overall the frame is fairly rigid, fairly stiff, but then you've got compliance from the wheels. I swapped out those tires quite quickly. I don't think that's a suitable tire set to be pushing hard on, especially with the speed grip rubber in the rear, which is very, very hard and lacks traction. But otherwise, it's an impressively capable bike, especially given its sort of design, and definitely one that I've had a reasonable amount of fun testing. I almost found myself enjoying some technical sections of trail more because it doesn't naturally lend itself to making it as easy as possible for you to turn off your brain and charge. But one thing is for sure, at 25 kilos and with not a huge amount of support in the suspension on either end, it doesn't necessarily kind of set the trail alight on the slightly mellower stuff. For a 140mm travel e-bike, it's definitely not the peppiest and the sharpest feeling. So riders who are wanting to ride pretty much exclusively flow trails, or yeah, just generally have a really kind of active and lively feeling bike, are not necessarily going to be best served by this bike. But it climbs pretty damn well. It's got plenty of weight on that front wheel. It carves a turn pretty nicely going up the hill because the head angle isn't too slack. In fact, it's quite steep in the grand scheme of things these days, at least. But yeah, long rear end makes it nice and yeah, easy to maintain weight on that front wheel on steeper bits of climb. Bosch motor is powerful, 750 watt-hour battery, gives you really good range. In terms of component spec, everything has performed reasonably well. I did manage to lose a spoke from the rear wheel at one point, just which shook loose. But otherwise everything's held up, being really solid, and yeah, has definitely suited the nature of this bike, if not quite providing the absolute pinnacle of performance. The brakes worked really well, albeit with those slightly uncomfortable for me anyway levers, but otherwise, yeah, they've been performing pretty damn good, never overheated, always gave me plenty of power. So yeah, I think overall Cube has done a solid job with the Stereo Hybrid 140. It's not a bike that I would recommend for myself or for similar riders to me, but for a rider looking to go out, cover ground, and have a comfortable time while they're doing it, because it is nice and comfortable to climb on, super kind of plush off the top suspension feel, and yeah, definitely kind of all day suitable to log out some miles in the backcountry and ride some fairly aggressive terrain quite comfortably, just not quite at this pinnacle of their speed. I think it's a solid choice, and yeah, I've definitely enjoyed testing it. I hope you guys have enjoyed checking out this video on the Bosch ABS-equipped Cube Stereo Hybrid 140. If you have, then drop us a like, leave us a comment, let us know what you think of this bike, and if the ABS system intrigues you, or if it's something that you've had experience with, we'd love to hear how you've got on with it. And subscribe to the channel to see more awesome content on awesome innovative tech like Bosch ABS and bikes like the Cube Stereo Hybrid 140. Thanks for watching, catch you out on the trails.